this is my ordering of what I'm going. This is my ordering of what I'm going to be doing. Okay, going down like that. And here is where I'll tell you what my problem was that has affected me a lot this last year. For about 2 years ago, the European Education Research Journal, Eric Monget, myself, and I forget who else, maybe Martin Simon from Leuven, we had this idea of inviting a call for papers on the 4 freedoms of the European Union. Let me ask you this. Do you know what the 4 freedoms are? That's the problem. That's the problem. Right, okay, because this has been at the heart of arguments in where I am. You know, the whole Brexit thing. There was a whole lot of argument about the 4 freedoms. You sign up to these as a nation. It's the freedom of capital to move, the freedom of people, which you are benefiting from, research and mobility, the freedom of goods, the freedom of services. Okay, now actually I had not done work on this. I'd only known it through research and mobility and projects and so forth. But it's one of the central tenets of the union. You accept those and you're in, you can't accept those and you have to leave. Okay, so, and because I'd had an interest in big education companies, I thought, well, we'll see who knows, who can write about this, who can tell us things. It was a disaster because people could talk about research and mobility, but they couldn't talk about new education companies in Europe. They couldn't talk about education goods that are now sold across Europe. So it was maybe the right question, but the wrong audience. Since that time, I've had people in economics and business who tell me more, but perhaps it's not what we regard as an education question. And it's that problem, what is an education question, that I want to talk about. I'm going to start in the old way, as if I know what I'm doing. But then I get into this, which is new to me, because I'm asking not only who are actors, but what knowledge do they have? And what knowledge then does the EU have? So I've thrown everything up in the air, and because I have such respect for you, I want you to tell me how it works. This better work. Okay, so this did not work. We did get 1 or 2 really good papers on research and mobility, which is a core idea which affects you a lot with Erasmus and so forth. But we didn't get it on some of the other big actors. So, okay, the climax hasn't started yet. Okay, so, is this? No, it's not. I think it might be the screen. You know? Emilian, do I have to shrink the screen a little? Or move it back? Oh, no, it's chipped. Okay, well, I'll talk for a bit. I'll talk about how I started. Okay, so I have to do this a little bit. I started in the mid-1990s when I got involved with a European association, when I got involved with a thematic network which was set up for a short period to organize teacher education. I got involved much more working across European countries on small projects and so forth. And in a sense, especially in relation to the European Association, okay, can everybody follow that? I'm going to talk over it. Basically, we were sitting in a council meeting with people, presidents and professors from Germany and France and Sweden and Denmark and UK. And actually, although it had started as a European association only a couple of years before, we didn't know what it was doing. So my question, like what is going on, was first of all a question in a committee meeting. Well, what's going on here? What have we got to decide? Where's the money? That was the French question. Where is the money going? And we said, I don't know where the money's going. Then it built into what does a European association do? And I was also involved in European projects, and I was interested then in what exactly is a European project. I don't know whether this was because we feel in Britain that education researchers are very under-socialized. If you're in psychology, you know exactly the state of your discipline and how you move through it. Education is not like that. It's more like business studies. It's just like a pile of people trying to work out what's happening. And if it's different in other places, then all I can say is the kind of professional questions I'd had up to this point were still happening on a European frame. What's happening here? What's happening in this meeting? What am I supposed to be doing in this association? If it's a European project, is it research? Who does it report to? What is our obligations? What are our obligations? So actually those questions stayed with me for a good 10, 12 years as I was working through the ERA meetings and trying to give an identity to the association. If you're in a national association, you don't keep asking, what do we do? Basically, people in national associations know what they're supposed to do, and they know the boundaries around it. But we were in a very new space, and the more that people said this is what we do, the more I thought they were inventing it. We hadn't developed a language, a discourse that could help us move forward. So I started to work pragmatically on what is a cultural and political approach to the study of education. I tried to borrow or reject things from social sciences if it helped me. Basically, the social sciences don't really consider education. If you think I'm wrong, fine, but generally I feel that education is not something that interests the social sciences. And I can think of this as lots of little anecdotes. When you turn up for social science meetings of some kinds and they say, where are you from? You say, education. What are you doing here? Is the first response. It's crazy. And also, in a way, I think we've invented a kind of serfdom for ourselves. We accept that they don't know about our questions, they don't want to know, and they're powerful, and we are not. That is the English experience. Whether you think it applies in other areas, that you must make that decision. But basically, when I moved into reading across social science areas, accountancy, business, sociology, education really wasn't. Sometimes you got something you could use, but it wasn't. It was either not about education, or I could try and use it to explain some things about education. So, for example, that really excellent Oslo policy area thing called ARENA, I could walk through it, I could take bits from it, but it was never addressed to me. So that was my problem. So in a way, I was not only asking these questions, I was being fairly pragmatic of saying, oh, I can see how that works, that might work. Maybe that's my nature, maybe that's how I work, I don't know. I was influenced also when we started to get very big European projects, big arguments about the governance of education, talking about post-bureaucracy, which is a very kind of English, well, Thatcherite idea of how things are governed, and having big arguments with colleagues from Portugal and France and, well, not French health, but French education, all kinds of different problems in relation to this. But it was something that really interested me about how governance is organized. What do I say there? There's no... Okay. Well, okay. Governance works on the idea that the state requires partnerships between central, local, philanthropic, private, professional expert groups and agencies. Okay, so it's very, in a way, the state no longer has its own experts, its own departments, certainly in the case of England, but I know that's an extreme case. But it works like this in other places now more. That, in fact, experts are often drawn in from private industry to work on a project and then move back again. So there was the idea of a state organizing itself separately from the private sector, for example, is not really a workable idea in England any longer. Well, it might be in the future with any luck. So there's no. So what you're looking at is the difficulty of managing the state when you're constantly relying upon groups of different kinds or interest groups and so forth. What you gain and what you lose, swift action, but not coherence, and not stability. And this notion, which is whatever works, is a kind of byword of this approach. It's not about consistency over time. It's about, does it work? Can it work? Okay. So some of this thinking was at work in different countries that our projects were about, was present, we thought, inside the Commission, inside European discourse. And when the partnerships of governance were described, they were usually described with the role of business and commerce as partners in the continuing Europeanization of education. So the gradual process of Europeanizing, I've not defined it, but it's a combination of things. It's about something like this, for example. A common space that we've created with a little bit of funding to get together to talk about what interests us. You can treat that as an element of Europeanization. You can treat standardization of the fact that we've only got we've commonly now got certain ways in which we work with each other or what we accept, how to work. But business and commerce were always treated as partners in the description of how governance in Europe worked. Now, my problem, I've got several at the moment, but this one, is that I could see all this busy work, cross-border mobilizations in practical and policy networks, research projects in education, old and new public, semi-public, private actors. You had the sense, as you worked in Europe more and more, from conversations with people, the degree of involvement in what in some ways are governing processes. What was perplexing to me, like I'll give you an example of a conversation I had at Bristol. When I said to a person I was meeting in a meeting, you know, do you work in Europe? She said, no, not really. I do go to Brussels to talk with my people in my area. Well, her area was about indicators in school improvement. I think that's what it was. This was a few years ago. So, well, what kind of meetings are there? Well, we've got very leading Dutch colleagues, and what they were doing was working on a major European document, I think of the late 1990s, about performance in schooling. I can't remember it now. It's in the papers I wrote. She did not regard herself as a policy worker, as working for European governments. She saw herself as working with other expert colleagues on producing a document. That document I knew was a key document. So it's quite interesting to me the way that, at least at one level, people didn't see themselves as, let's call them policy actors. They just saw themselves as being encouraged by European initiatives to work together. And professionally, that was a great improvement for them. So they were happy. Okay. I got very interested in the way that national agencies, well, actually from the 1950s, but certainly now, almost merge their identities at times in European, super-European meetings, transnational meetings. I went to talk to the National Foundation for Education Research near London, and it had been set up in the late 1940s with some American money, I think, and always saw itself as an extremely national English, not UK, English agency, working in a very English way. But it's the home of the Eurydice network for England. So down a corridor in another room, there are professional colleagues who are busy creating data more or less on instruction, certainly on request, from the Commission. This was a few years ago. So they actually didn't see themselves as working for the Commission. They saw themselves as English people working in an older English agency. So again, I was thinking, how are we locked into a relationship with each other? How does it work? From private conversations to some institutional links. I went to, because of a thematic network, I went to visit in a street in Brussels, the very first year of the European SchoolNet, or sometimes called just SchoolNet or EUNet. Does anybody see that one? Yeah. And there was a room full of, 10 people working with 10 computers. And so I said, well, what is it? How does it work? And they said, well, we're given, the Ministries of Education set us up. It was the first ever Ministries of Education project together. They want us to sort of encourage cultural connections inside Europe. The next time I visit them, I noticed that there was banners crossing the top of their computers. And it was like, a school in Lithuania would like to join an environmental science project with schools across Europe children aged 8 to 10. And then another one would come. I said, what's going on? They said, well, they're now, we've got a big schools network and they're constantly asking for partners. You know about this. So now, nobody there would talk about this in terms of Europeanization. In what ways are we constructing a networked, imbricated collection? The more I talked like that, the more they distrusted me. But from my point of view, I could see it as the building of a common European space among schools, something we've never had. Schools of East and West. So this was, I regarded that as a step. I don't know how I could evaluate that, but I accept as a step towards European practices, European commonality. Actually, there was another step, because I must have taken another visit there. They eventually created a way that you could join in this network that came later. And to do it, you had to achieve certain standards. They not like major international standards, but the standards of, we expect your school to have policies about this, this, and this. We expect you to be, I don't know, I can't remember them, prompt. You know, I can't remember what they were. But you weren't allowed in unless you could meet that level, and you were evaluated on it. So in other words, they were creating a common space and a standardized space. So with things like that, I was having a good time arguing about how this field is being created, in my view. And especially in European researchers, where we were also beginning to... The curve inside the Europe era, the curve of people, what is it now? So it's almost 20 years. The curve of people who are now or have written papers together with colleagues from other countries in Europe is like that. When we started, it didn't even exist. You know, English people would know about English people, and Belgians would know about Belgians, and Dutch about Dutch. But this is actually about people who are working together on papers from different countries, like that. We haven't done a paper together, have we, Paolo? I can't remember. No. But anyway, so there is a sense in which spaces, in a broad sense, are created. People create spaces, spaces create people. What then began to interest me was, in what ways could this be seen as a governing process? And I wrote about this idea of soft governance, which came from Joseph Nye's work on soft power, quite a long time ago now. And it's, in some ways, it's about an attraction, a persuasive power. So nobody is demanding, controlling in a hierarchy. It persuades you. And I think that's what was happening to the researchers that I knew, that in fact people argued to me that ERA was a home for them when their national setting was not. So it's not just that they were quite comfortable and went, they actually felt that ESA, the conference, was a home to them. Working with people in different countries, working together, was where they felt productive or at ease. I felt that as well, so maybe I was listening. But it's interesting that I had that repeated to me. It wouldn't be for everybody, but I think maybe for some places, some colleagues, some countries, it really, well, for some countries, it was actually a free space. It was a space, and my friends will have to excuse me, not dominated by their professors. And I don't come from a country that has that a lot, but in projects one recognizes that there's a hierarchy of speech at work, and it has to be taken in turn. ERA was completely free of that, because the ERA question basically is, who are you, what do you do? I don't know about that, can you speak, tell me about it. We're all in a new place. So there wasn't a kind of ordering of speech.